Friendly greetings from me to you. In 2010, we've traveled into the future with this perceived new year. Now, I want to talk about something which I believe will be forever. I may be not speaking totally literally, but you get the gist of it. About this topic, which comes up again and again. It's a question, actually, and it tends to be quite cliched. But I'll examine closer and explain why there should be a greater incentive behind it and more weight, more context, that sort of thing. The question is, of course, and this happens most frequently with electronic music. It's by no means unique only to electronic music, but because technology-based music tends to be so predominantly gear-based, gadget lovers' dream, as it were. So someone is relatively new, they will ask a more experienced artist, what did you use to make that? Or what gear do you use? And something no one, absolutely no one is immune to. Now, I'm fascinated by questions when they bring out the psychological and the experienced state of someone, because someone who is a more experienced, and that is not to say that they're necessarily better, if you can even quantify that as a musician, but they've spent more time with the gear. They will likely not just ask that, they will ask something more eclectic, something along the lines perhaps of, wait for this, not just what did you use, but how did you use it? Now that gets into interesting complexities. And even beyond that, if you are a serious gear hacker, not all of us are, but some of us can be counted as privileged to know those with such skills, such talents, then we will ask, how do I build my own? How do I make this from the scratch and even on a budget? The DIY ethos, the do-it-yourself philosophy. So this is something, of course, I realize there are a lot of good hearts out there who are going to ask me, who have already asked me, what keyboard controllers do you use? And the curious thing, of course, is it usually ends there. There isn't a follow-up question of, for instance, okay, I know you use this, or what do you use and why? How did you choose it? What's the story? What motivated you to pick this? Like in a comic book, the powerful origin story, the decisive moment of how a would-be superhero, as it were, comes to be that way. Somewhat of a literary stretch, but nonetheless, it's evocative. So it gets us to ask questions. And I appreciate the curiosity, but I do not like laziness. I do not like when, for instance, I have a very clear fact and I'm willing to make additions to it, willing to expand it with more answers that I've already given. Instead of answering the same thing redundantly many, many times, that's simply not a good use of time, period. And I don't like it when I have the answer right there for my gear list or what do I use, and I get asked in email, of course, and I reply when I can to eclectic correspondence. Look that word eclectic up. It's one of the most powerful words I've ever encountered. So then it's something I've already answered, so I'm not going to answer it again. And the motivations of someone to call into question, not just as a moral character judgment, but to inquire. It's like the person who goes to the karate school and tells the sensei in there, I want to learn karate because I want to beat up people. Maybe you've heard this kind of story before. Well, karate is not all about that, or not even mostly about that, and not just about self-defense per se. There's tappings into the broader self-healing of your life when you can manage who you are internally, internalize that, and express that, and of course physical fitness and all that's quite important. But the topic we're dealing here is this question of asking for the mechanics, asking the gear. And of course it matters. There's some people who are like, you can make something with anything, and that's just too broad and abstract. I don't believe that. It's not practical. Clearly having nice tools goes a long way. It will save you a lot of time. But it's important to bond with your tool, just like a martial artist. If you're going to have weapons, you need to become one with the sword, as it were. You don't go blindly out there with something you're unfamiliar with. Police officers must know, become requisitely familiar with their firearms. So in the same way, we have so much choice. So I'd like to explain why whenever I'm asked, I picked a certain thing, like this microphone here. Why do I like it? Because it's not just a microphone. It's nice to have hands-free, by the way. So on the stand, Zoom H4n, there's other reasons. It has built-in effects, which are quite helpful, and it can be doubled as a USB audio interface, which is right for what I have at the current time. It's very quick to record samples in, chop them up in Ableton Live, and tether them to warp markers. And that gets into the question of, why do you like Ableton Live? Well, one of the reasons is very flexible. It is conducive to the whole elastic audio paradigm of being able to stretch things and warp things and experiment with possibilities. And I like that playfulness. I like that the interface doesn't impart too much of a character of its own. It's relatively laid back, as it were, and that encourages me to really get into the flow. Look up Mihai, Csikszentmihalyi. I'm not going to spell that, but I know how to pronounce it. So it speaks to it. The experiences, you can know where someone is coming from and how much experience they have by the questions they're asking you about electronic music. Not that they're ever necessarily bad questions, but they might just say and might just tell you without further words the body language, as it will. Even if you don't see one's body, maybe you perceive them gesticulating. Hopefully you don't misinterpret an email or written correspondence. That's rambling. But to tell how much experience someone has, because that's certainly the kind of questions I asked when I was very new. I wanted to know, how did you get that sound? That was a really big one for me. How did you make that melody? And you ask those. But when you become more confident in knowing what is all out there, then it becomes more a matter of refining. That we have these tools, what more can you get out of them? And that's a big problem in today's day and age, when you can download so many hundreds and hundreds of plugins, many of them free in quality, and you don't really get to know anything deep. And is that a problem? Well, from an efficiency standpoint, yes, it is, because you might have so many kinds of reverbs, and yeah, each one has a different kind of character. But if I come to you, I ask you to tell me, like tasting wine, of which I am not a connoisseur of, sushi or anything, baseball cards or the game itself, not just fantasy sports leagues, but to tell me, to distinguish, what is the difference, the shades of them. Can you really tell me? Can you really show me in your music? It's important to know that, because remember, these things consume memory as well. There's the technical standpoint of having a stripped down workload. In addition to electronic music, I'm very set on productivity, getting things done, not just that philosophy alone per se. I have my own take on things, but I like talking about lifestyle design, like Tim Ferriss, for instance. I love reading a lot of productivity blogs. Life Hacker is one of my favorite, and I apply these things to music, because it does matter with an artist's regime. When you're being creative, you want to flow. You don't want things to impede. You don't want interruptions. And that's one of the problems I think that musicians face today, but they will not openly admit to a lot of the time, will be that there's a lot of social networking pressure. Then gotta get it on, gotta post here and there on your Twitter, on your Facebook, your blog, as I do on your Flickr. I got many, Second Life. Some of those will make more of a difference than others, and you've got to weight them, because sometimes you can do a lot, you can expend a lot of energy, but it is wasted. You don't have a reaction, no one is listening there, so you need to go somewhere else. But again, this comes to a question of, what social networking tools do you use? Not just that, but how and why? How did you come to choose the story? Because that tells more about you as a person, where you have come from, where you are, and where you are going. After reading some Richard Feynman and watching some YouTube videos with him and going up and down like that in his chair, there's a great video on him talking about explaining fundamental forces involving magnets, that sort of thing. Very fascinating stuff. But anyway, that's something to think of, whether you're new to electronic music or much, much more experienced. There's always more experience, so to gain good things to think about, good things to act on. Look at what's out there, and with even a narrow piece of gear, even a critically small selection